Welcome to the Living Farms podcast, where voices from around the world come together to shape the future of biodynamic agriculture.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Living Farms podcast. This is our last session number 3 of the humus part of our course, and we have been traveling through different experiences of farming. In our first session, we went into aspects of the human being. In our second sessions, we went into the cosmos, and now we're in humus. We've had already beautiful interventions by Uli Hurte, who is a farmer, and Dieter Lenoir, who is a doctor and a farmer. And today, we have the great pleasure and honor to have with us Bruno Follador from Brazil. And he is well known to many of you. He is part of our, he's been part of our section, working around the section and the Biodynamic Federation and working in his own land. But he also has experience in many different countries. He started his training in Europe, and then he went to the United States, where he became an associate researcher at the Nature Institute. And he was a founder and director there of the soil program, Living Soils, which is right on our topic. And he's been giving lectures and courses in Europe and Latin America and the USA. And now, a few years ago, he moved with his family back to Brazil, to Botucatu. So it's beautiful to talk to Bruno, because he is able to bring in the consciousness of different places, the tropics, the deserts, the northern aspect, the different cultures in Europe. And so it's incredible to have you here, Bruno. Welcome to the Living Farms podcast.
Thank you, Eduardo. It's good to see you and be here collaborating with you all.
It's very nice to have you, and I would love for our podcast to be divided into different aspects. And the beginning, I would say, in your experience, seeing so many so many composts around the world, to be able to have seen farmers from different places, what is your contact? What is your first impression? Where do you find humus? What is humus to you?
Well, I actually grew up for the first part of my life in an area where it was quite difficult, I would say, to find humus, because I grew up in São Paulo, this massive city in the southeast of Brazil, which has around the core 11 million people. And I actually grew up in an apartment. But as a child, you could always find trees and places where one can, even in such a massive city, find nature. And as I became older and started becoming more conscious of what is happening with the earth and with the people, and in Brazil and São Paulo being a city with such a stark contrast between the rich and the poor, the social question became very prominent for me, at the same time that nature became a focus, and what could I do for her? And becoming aware that agriculture, in one way, it's the epicenter of the disaster and the hope. I made this decision that it's not through social science or biology or even environmental law, which at one point is what I thought I would do to try to do something for the earth, but it was through agriculture. And realizing the amount of erosion we get, especially in the tropics because of the rain, where we could see these incredible gullies. This question of where could I find humus became this long journey of mine, where on one side, I could not find it. Because what is this magical substance? And at the same time, as I began to enter into places where culture was present, and I began to be able to cultivate soil, I began to start touching on what could it mean to encounter humus.
Uh, Yes, you yourself being a phenomenologist, it's interesting because, of course, one cannot define humus. It would be ridiculous if we would attempt to do that. We can characterize it, or we can see it through its expression. So that's one of the challenges when you are a scientist. I know you started in science. You're a geographer, so when one does that, it starts finding that things are not defined, and we find them indirectly by their deeds. So I guess we also find humus by its deeds, what it does to the world, to nature, to the plants.
Y- Yes, and what something that came to me now, just hearing what you were saying, being very much interested in language, is this understanding that humus and humanity have the same etymological root. And from early on, working with this question of what is the relationship between soil erosion and social conflicts, and this idea of where humus is being created, culture is being created, where on so many farms, even in organic biodynamic farms, at times the soil being so compacted and not being alive. And you say, okay, what is happening? And it's interesting that often where there is no humus, no soil structure, often there is no people caring for the land. So this something that moved me more in a philosophical sense, that led me more towards the practical. But to ask this question, what is the relationship between soil erosion and human conflicts, social conflicts, and what it means when we actually rejuvenate and heal the land, and what happens to people and the culture around it.
Yes, it's really amazing how there are many ways of getting into the work that we do. And sometimes we start with basic questions like, I want to produce food for myself. And then we move on to other things and other things. But we eventually come to the living aspect of the earth and how can we enliven it. And it's really interesting because we start thinking of compost as something obvious, something direct, something that, oh yeah, it's a no thought thing. It's obvious. Nature does it all the time. But really, it's quite an alchemical process of changing substance and modifying substance. And then we find that we have the possibility to work with nature to create its own living aspect. And that's quite a responsibility. It's quite a beautiful challenge. But then at the same time, even us in the biodynamic movement, in organic movement, we are not so good at it. I could say sometimes you find really iconic farms that have still a challenge to do composting. And I don't know what has been your experience throughout your work visiting so many farms. What is your experience? How are we doing our compost? How is that going in our biodynamic movement?
To be, yeah, very direct and honest, from my experience, even going back to my trainings, and at times it could be even felt like it's a taboo to actually acknowledge where we're at. I would say that we're not doing well, to be very honest. And when I look back at one of my trainings in the US, I remember the compost pile there. And we would receive a lot of food scraps from the college and from the restaurants, and it smells so bad.
Mhm.
It was a terrible experience, and it really struck me at one moment because there were so many rats and mice around. We had to build a cage around the the compost pile,
Mhm.
so like she was imprisoned.
Mhm.
And we had to kill at one time like 18. We killed 18 mice, and we were doing with pitchfork. I was, 21 or so. And I said, wow. But at the same time, I would read the literature and I said, what an amazing thing compost is. But I must say that at that point, I didn't encounter it. And going to so many now through my work, visiting, big working farms or smaller places, I see that there's a yearning, a wish to do composting, but at the same times, there's an enormous difficulty of integrating the composting process to the life of the farm, the life cycle. And what I have witnessed is that the composting process becomes an appendix. So it often comes too late. And many times the farmer is conscious that things are not doing well. Other times there's not a conscious around it, but we're always coming too late in guiding these life processes. And there are situations in bigger places when you're dealing then with larger volumes, be it at vineyards or dairy farms, where I have been asked then to come to consult, where I had to make, the difficult suggestion and say, please don't apply it.
Mhm.
And the first reaction says, "What do you mean don't apply it? We have the preparation in it. We did it." And of course one is seeing these, all these windrows, but then I say, "But let's smell it. Let's look at it." And so once we make a profile and start observing what is actually happening and start really to take in the structure, the colors, the smell, and understanding what happened in its biography, then I often ask, would you apply this to your land? And they say, no, we couldn't.
Yeah, sometimes it's even detrimental that you apply something like that.
Absolutely. And that's where it says you actually will create biological, physical, chemical problems and challenges to your soil and to your plants. And like I said, there are many reasons why the composting process came to be that way. And I think one is that we have a lot of abstract ideas about it. And at the same time, we're not allowing time to understand what it takes to transform decaying matter into humus and how to guide this process of transformation. We're able to do that well with cheese and wine, and now with the whole scene of gourmet coffees and so forth, with how we roast it. But when it comes to guiding this process of transformation in the composting site, we're not giving us enough time to see it and make better decisions of how to transform it.
I think that's very crucial. And I always come back to this idea that I have lately is that, okay, so 100 years of biodynamic agriculture have gone by, and we've learned and done a lot of things, good things too, in many places of the world. But this gives us a chance to revisit what we are doing. And I think one of the key places where we have to revisit our work is in the composting. I think soil fertility, preparation making, and compost are very key to our future. And we have to be very strict and very careful with how we do it. At the same time, to have an open, artistic, and loving attitude towards it is also crucial. It's not just about making lab tests to the compost. That would be only one aspect of what we have. So I think that it is important to go back into that aspect. And I was always thinking, so what is crucial for you in a compost making? I know there's many factors. It varies a lot within countries, but what would you say for you are the stepping stones towards walking in the good direction?
Yes, but before going into that, something that I've it's again something it could sound harsh to say, but that's also been my experience in being in dialogue with all these different cultures and places. That at times I think we're misunderstanding the preparations when we are given or when we work with the idea that as soon as we inoculate, quote unquote, the compost with the preparations, that, okay, now the magic will happen
Hmm.
and then we can turn our back and take care of our hay or our pruning and go back to the other work. But that idea, I have not seen it ever working. And it could be the most beautiful preparation in the world. But if we don't give it a proper body and care for this body and guide the different stages of transformation, then the preparations are abandoned, just as this being on the way of becoming a being is abandoned. And then a lot of damage can be done to the soil, to the plants, and also to the image or what the preparations are and could be. So that's one, I think, also important thing for us to look into and take more seriously.
It is alive and it needs our care and it needs our attention. Yeah. And in many places, I always recommend that there's somebody devoted to the compost and the preps, and that's their only job. It's not when you need it. It's like, okay, who can go turn the compost? Volunteers, please. And then it doesn't really work because you don't
Yes,
have a personal connection and you don't know where it's at and what it
yes,
needs.
yes. And then in some places that won't be possible to have one person, but someone needs to take responsibility for it, even if this person has different tasks. And to your question of if I understood it, how one approaches or what is important to enter it, I think as you already gave a heads up, it depends, and because it so much depends on the context of the social context, the climate context, the economical context, but independent of all these variables of also scale and so forth, I think an understanding that we are blending, that we're bringing different materials together, and to start realizing and taking seriously, as soon as I have one dominant material, be it more nitrogenous or carbonaceous, is how do I balance this with something else? And so there is this moment of not knowing of what I actually need to do. I have all my previous, you can say, knowledge of carbon to nitrogen ratio, humidity, and so forth. And that's often how I feel when I go to a new place where I don't know the climate, or when I am invited to work with a new substance. I have never seen it. It is this moment of not knowing, and I have to begin touching it. I have to begin smelling it. I have to begin to realize, how will it behave when I pile it up? And so I think this first, allowing oneself to actually engage in this conversation, in a very practical conversation with the materials at hand, and to ask, is this already enough, or I have to bring other materials into this composition? I think that's one place to start, I would say.
Yes. I always think of some cooking experiences when you go to the refrigerator and you cook with whatever you have, even though you were thinking of something else. You don't have that, and even in farms that happens. 1 year you don't have exactly the materials you wish you had, and you have to work with that and learn to do it.
Yes, and it's interesting, because when we say, oh, we're working with cow manure and straw, but then to take serious, how is this cow manure and this straw? So, for example, working in south of Germany with beautiful Swiss brown cows, or even when I was in upstate New York, I had access to this beautiful, fresh manure with straw, like golden straw. And it's such a, a lovely thing to work with. But as I began to work, especially in Chile and Argentina, And prior to the trip, where we're saying, okay, which materials we have, they say, oh yeah, we have tons of cow manure, and we can have other carbonaceous material. And I remember encountering the first time I saw this cow manure, and I looked at it, I said, where is the cow manure? And it said, oh, there. And there was this big mound, and it looked like soil. But then I touched it. It didn't feel like soil. It was very light and it didn't have any structure. And it had a strong smell of ammonia. So it was this manure that was, bought from a neighboring place that was just scraped and cleaned. And this freshness, this yellowish and greenish color, of fresh manure was no longer there. So it was this powdery substance that on one side one could call it cow manure, but at the same time say it is not cow manure. And how do I work with it? Because if I wet it and mix it with grapes and grape stalks, it will heat up.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I take seriously that, yes, it was once cow manure, but now it's this other thing? And it will demand for me another level of attention and other ingredients to balance it out that is much different from a farmer working in south of Germany with this beautiful, fresh green manure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To actually take seriously, how does the substance look like? Not just know the name or its quantitative analysis.
I think that's very crucial because if you understand the principles of the substances, you're able to be much more creative. One of the things that I've also noticed in our movement is that we've made very rigid definitions of what things are. I always joke about this idea of a day being a root day, and I say, what does that mean? That's as abstract as you can get reading the calendar. There's a whole array of cosmic influences and a whole array of beings working to make that day something, but it's definitely not a root day. It's just so abstract. And I think in composting, we do the same. We just tend to make bricks of concepts, and when they don't fit, we're out of whack. So I think this idea of knowing the principles of what's behind the substances will allow us to be much more creative and plastic in our ideas to resolve these challenges.
Yes, and there is this dear story that I am very fond of. One time I received an email from this farmer, which I very much like and admire his work so much. He has 7,000 hectares in the south of Brazil, and he sent me an email with all these attachments. And for each substance, cow manure and tree bark and rice husk, he sent me a quantitative analysis, the price of the tonnage to bring this material to his farm. And he says, Bruno, I want to start a composting process. I have 180 hectares. That's our, pilot area. And here's all the price, the tonnage. I want to apply 10, or I don't remember exactly, 10 or 20 tons per hectare. Please make me the formula. And we have 6 months to do it all because that's our dry season. And when I saw this email, I said, my gosh, what am I going to say to this guy? And I said, well, could you tell me out of this manure? Well, first I said, thank you for all the information. I said, but could you please tell me how does the manure smell? And how old is this manure? And it was coming, he's not a biodynamic farm. He's, undefined. He doesn't use any pesticides or fertilizers, but he was buying it from a feedlot. And I said, okay, out of this football field, of this feedlot, I want to know how the manure looks inside of the middle of this field. And how old is it? Did it receive rain? Is it dry? Did it leach out? And at first he became a bit impatient with these questions, but he finally sent this, one of his colleagues, his workers, and he sent me all these videos. in pictures. And just by seeing the pictures, the color, if it was steaming or not, and also the description that I receive from these videos, it was quite clear that it was an empty substance. Even though quantitatively it would meet certain of the basic criterias of nutrients, I said, please don't buy any of this. Let's start with a smaller amount because this is an empty substance. Now, I'm not saying that quantitative analysis don't have their place, and they're very important. But by actually engaging with the substances as it really is, in a sense that I can perceive it with all of my senses,
Hmm.
that is much more practical and will give me the insights of how do I with what do I need to mix it with? How much can I use of this, and so forth. And amazingly, this person absorbed that so quickly, and he makes an amazing compost. The windrows are over 100-meter long,
Mhm.
and and actually he's making better compost than many biodynamic farms make with the preparations.
Hmm.
And that's where we go back to this question or theme that you open up our conversation of what is the state of the art of compost making our movement today.
Well, I think we still are in a very good moment to learn and to develop this. And of course, there's many scales. We also have on the other side of the polarity this very, very small farmer with very limited resources that also can create compost from other challenges. I think with this reflection that we're having, we will finish our first podcast. And I want to thank you for being with us today, Bruno. Thank you so much. And we will continue our conversation.